Hello, I'm Angie. I'm an automation architect and also a senior developer advocate at Tools. I lead Test Automation University, which is a free online resource with courses on all things test automation. There's my info if you want to subscribe to my blog where I write all about test automation techniques and strategies. There's the link to Test Automation University, and then there's my Twitter handle. The title of today's talk is, What's That Smell? Tidying Up Our Test Code. Meet Jake. Jake writes bad code. But I don't blame Jake. You see, Jake was a tester, and his manager tasked him with creating an automation project. So Jake, new to coding, new to test automation, he went out looking for resources online to learn how to do this. And he found some from credible experts in the field, and he followed along pretty well. Jake even got his first test running. So he felt really excited about this, and he continued on with this pattern, creating more and more tests. However, this was problematic because when we find those introductory tutorials online, usually they kind of just throw everything together and help you get started. They're trying to introduce you to the Selenium WebDriver library without adding too much complexity around architecture and things like this, because quite frankly, Jake wasn't ready for that just yet. But Jake didn't know to follow on and learn more about designing his tests in an efficient way. So as he continued creating his tests with this pattern, then his automation framework became unruly, unstable. Tests started breaking for no good reason. They became flaky. And eventually, Jake's manager was no longer impressed and said, hey, let's just shelve this automation project. And he put it away. Some of you may be like Jake, where you learn just enough to get started but are unsure of how to get your code in a nice, clean, and stable way. Or maybe you're someone who just got hired and you have to clean up Jake's code. You have to be the one to take Jake's code off of the shelf and revamp this automation project. Or perhaps you're someone who you have your act together, you know all about clean coding, you're just here to judge me. But even if that's you, you've done so well that at some point they might want to scale out what you've done across the entire company. So hopefully you can learn some of these patterns and be able to give them names so that when you all hire more automation engineers, you can share these tips with them as well. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to actually go through Jake's code, and we're going to sniff out the code smells. So what is a code smell? Well, it's where technically your code isn't wrong. It works. Jake's code works. However, it's problematic in the way that it was designed, such that it slows down development and is prone to introduce new bugs. So I'm going to show you Jake's code base. First, I'll show you the application that Jake is testing. So this is Jake's application. It's a simple bookstore, one-page application. And Jake has some test data in here with 8 books, 8 of his favorite books on test automation. And this application works in a way that you can filter down these books by title or by author. For example, if Jake types in Java, we see the 3 books that have the Java in the title. If Jake types in Lisa, we see a book where Lisa Crispin is the author. Okay? Now let me show you Jake's code. So Jake has 2 tests so far in this class called search tests. One to search for a title, one to search for author. Let's go inside of the search for title. So Jake has some code here to set up Selenium WebDriver and launch the application. He specified the title of the book that's under test, Java for Testers. And then he searches for, well, first he clears the book. So that was pretty good of Jake. If we look at this, we want to make sure there's nothing in here first. So he clears it out, and there was a little bit of delay. So if you watch this, see how there was a little slight delay in the clear? So Jake added in some code to sleep. And then Jake searches for the title. That also has a slight delay, so he sleeps a little bit more. And then he has some code here to look through the visible books that are displayed and see if any of them contain the title that he's looking for. If it does, then he passes the test. If not, he fails the test, and then he closes the application. The next test, he searches for the author. So again, sets up everything with Chrome, launches the application, specifies the title, clears the search bar, types in the author this time as Lisa Crispin, has the little weights there, and looks for the book. Now, the way that this is going to work is I'm going to go smell by smell. Introduce you to a new smell. I even have cute little points that go with the smells to help you remember them. And what we're going to do is clean them up one by one. So if you're anything like me, you're going to get a little bit anxious. You're going to be on the edge of your seat because you're going to see a bunch of smells and you're going to want to clean them all up at one time. We're not doing that. Hold on to your horses. What we're going to do is iterate through this, cleaning them one by one because we don't want to goof something up, right? If you try to do too many things at once, it's easy to get confused. Also, some of the things that we do to clean up might even introduce another smell. But I promise you, by the end of this talk, all the smells will be gone. It'll be squeaky clean. Okay? Deal? All right. So we've looked at the code base. Let's look at the first smell, the long class smell. The purpose of the class is multifold. To find anything, you must scroll and scroll. Why might this be problematic to have a class that's too long? Well, for one, there's no single responsibility here. So a class should be responsible for a given thing. When it's responsible for multiple things, you start finding it really problematic. It's hard to find things. I kid you not, I worked on a project once. There was a class with thousands of lines of code. It made it impossible to find stuff in that class. It also made it difficult to maintain. So sometimes things already existed, but in some other form, and so you just kind of added what you needed, and it might be a duplicate. At that point, you didn't care. You was just trying to get in and get out. So in order to clean up this smell, the long class smell, we're going to separate concerns in Jake's code base. In test automation, it's very common to separate your framework from your test. And by framework, I mean the code that is executing all of the browser logic of navigating and interacting with the objects on the page. So the test is responsible for actually executing the scenario. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class in the framework, and we're going to take out the concern that is in this test that's about doing the browser stuff, and we'll place that inside of the framework package. So I'll make a new package here called Pages, and I'm going to follow the page object model design pattern here. My class, I'll call this search page. And in search page, I'll make a new method. We'll call this search. And this will return a Boolean if it finds the book. And I'm going to take out all of this stuff under the search all the way until the browser, right before the browser closes. And I'm going to place that inside of the search page. Okay. So we see that it's complaining about the driver, so let's go ahead and make a global object for that. And we'll make a constructor as well. And this will take the driver and set it. Okay. And we need to return a value, a Boolean. So we have this is book visible field. And when we find it, we set it to true. And initially, it was set to false. So we'll just return that if it's true or false. And we have to now call that. So let's go ahead and create a new instance of that. And we'll give it that driver. And then we'll just say search page dot search and pass in. This is the author one. So this was Lisa Crispin, right? And we're going to do this exact same thing in this method where we'll just get rid of all of this. And I'm just going to copy this. And add that there, but this time we're searching for the title. Okay, so this class is a lot shorter already. So that is separating the concerns for the long class smell. The next smell is the long method. This guy does it all, but it makes it hard to know when to call. So have you ever seen a method that's doing a whole bunch of things? Makes it really difficult for you as the caller. One, there's no single responsibility, right? Again, doing too much. And then it's confusing for callers. So do I call this method? Is it going to do what I'm expecting it to do? Is it going to do a little bit more? Sometimes when a method is doing too much, we see it with a whole list of parameters that it must take for all of these different cases. So it gets really confusing, making it difficult to read and understand. So we clean this one the same way we did the other one by separating the concerns. But first we have a little problem here. Our second method, our second test can't utilize that search method that we put in the framework. Why not? Well, if we look at the search, this one is searching for Lisa Crispin, so we can fix that a little bit by putting search for title. But this accepts the title, we search for it, and then we look to see if that title exists. Well, in the second test, we're putting in Lisa Crispin. So Lisa Crispin is not going to be the title of the book. So when you move things over to your framework, they become more generic. So you have to keep this in mind and make them generic enough to handle all the cases. So we're going to separate this method because it's long, and that's why it's confusing, because we're trying to reuse this title to both search and verify. So let's split this. Let's see how many responsibilities is here. Well, we see it's clearing. That's a responsibility all of its own. So we can make another method here that just clears. And we can take this code and put it into the clear method and then just call clear. The search part, that's fine, but all of this stuff to see if the book is visible should not be in the search method. So we'll change this Doesn't need to return anything. And we'll make another method to put the book in. So we'll say public Boolean is book visible. And then this can take a title and search for it, and search to see if it's there. Now this one, I'm going to change this from title because it's misleading, because you can put a title or an author in. So let's just call this query. So now these methods are a lot shorter. Okay. Let's see what other smells are here. Duplicate code. When you find yourself coding in haste, it's very tempting to copy and paste. How many of you have found yourselves in such a situation? Well, Angie, why might this be problematic? Any change that's needed, you'll have to do this in multiple spots, right? It's very easy to miss a spot like this. Also, it can lead to other smells. So as you're copying and pasting all over the place, this can lead again to the long methods or the long classes. So we're going to remove the duplication in Jake's code base. We're going to look in both of these classes. The first one where I see some duplication here is the launching of the browser and the closing of it. So let's go ahead and move those out and use the before class and after class annotations so that those run before the tests run. We'll just call this launch app, and we'll move this there. And let's make an after. And we'll move this here. So this is even helping our methods become smaller. Just what I meant by duplication making, introducing other smells. So this driver is complaining, I don't know what that is. So let's move that to a global scope. And we can instantiate it before the class. So then we can move all of this and all of this. Wow, this is looking better already. Okay. There's a little bit of duplication still here, where we say the title and we have the search page. This search page instantiation can probably come out, so let's just go ahead and take that out as well. And we'll also instantiate this inside of this before class method. So, looking great. Ooh. 2 lines of code in each of these, right? Oh, we forgot one thing. We didn't call the is Boolean, is book visible. So let's make sure we are actually doing a test. And this one, you pass in title, and then same here. Okay, now this is still a little bit redundant, right? There's a pattern here. You could clean this up with something like a little private method. Let me show you. So I can say something like test search. And I can say, okay, this will take the query, and then it'll take the title. And then I can then do this call, right? And so then I can change something like this method. Let's just cut this right quick. I can do like a test search and then pass in the query as Lisa Crispin, and then pass in the title as Agile Testing. But I think this is a little too dry. When we say dry, do not repeat yourself, don't repeat yourself. I think it's a little too dry, because if I were to look at this test only has one line, which calls into another method. So now my eyes have to go and find this other method to see what it's doing, right? So there's a lot of practitioners nowadays are saying, it's okay for your code to be a little bit wet, Doesn't have to be super, super dry. So this, for readability purposes, I think this is much easier compared to the other method, where I can come to a test and say, this is the title, this is what we're searching for, and we make sure that's there. So I would prefer to leave it like that. Okay? Let's see if there's any duplication in the search page. So this ID, search bar, we see this repeated in the clear and the search method. It's a really good practice if you move your elements outside of the test themselves. Because again, if this ID changes, now I have to go and look through all of where we've used this, as opposed to one place. So let's make an element, we'll call it search bar. And this will find new bar. Wait, how does this work? Yeah, okay. And we can put in this search bar. And now, instead of repeating this, we can just replace it here and here. Now, if they happen to change this from search bar to search field, there's only one place we have to clean that up. This thread sleep is a little bit redundant too, but we'll clean that up with another smell. So let's go on to the next smell. The flaky locator strategy. At this moment, your locators work fine, but can they stand the test of time? So if you are someone who uses Chrome and you go into inspect to the dev tools and you say, hey Chrome, give me the XPath, and you use copy XPath, I beg of you to stop. The reason for that is whatever Chrome gives you is just relevant for this moment in time. Chrome has no idea that you plan to put this in an automation script that you want to run for months or years and still expect to work. So you need to make sure that the locators that you're getting are ones that are going to stand the test of time. Okay? Again, you don't want fragile locators and you don't want unreliables. This is the leading cause of flaky tests. So we're going to clean this up in Jake's code by stabilizing the locators. So if we look at this one, he's searching by ID. That's pretty good. We're cool with that one. Here's another one, though, in the isBookVisible method. This is searching. It's trying to find elements that have this ID of PID3, and he's using an XPath. I don't even know what that goes to. Let's see. Let's copy this and go to DevTools. And we're going to search for this. Okay, so this is showing the Agile testing book. So when Jake was coding this and he had it all within separate tests, this made sense. But again, as we move things to the framework layer, they have to be more generic. If I look at these books, all of them have IDs. But with it being in the framework, that's not even enough to search for ID. A lot of times we'll hear thought leaders say, oh, if you have an ID, search for that. But in some cases, that's not enough, right? In order for you to search for the ID, then the test would have had to tell you what the ID is. And for the test to know the ID, that means the test is going into the implementation details behind the application, which it should not be doing, right? So we can look for smarter things, like if we look at this method again, this is trying to get all of the books, the visible books. Yes, it's trying to get the visible books. So let's see if we can craft a locator to get the visible books. First, I'm going to make some of these invisible so that we can see what's going on. So all of them have this UI, LI has thumbs, so that doesn't seem helpful. We see a UI first child on one, a UI last child, and then we also see this UI screen hidden that looks promising. So if I'm trying to find all of the visible books, let's see. The UI screen hidden doesn't seem to be on any of these that are shown. So it looks like the visible books are the ones that don't contain that class. So we can write a CSS selector that says, find me all of the LIs that do not contain the class UI screen hidden. And notice here we have 3 things that came back, and it's the 3 visible books. So this is a much better, reliable locator. We'll add that to our test, but are we going to add it here? No, we just talked about moving this stuff outside of the methods themselves. So we're going to make a new by for visible books. And this one is by CSS selector. So we paste that in and change this hard-coded one to use that instead. Okay, what other smells can we get out of here? Indecent exposure. Too many see you. Your scope is too wide. All who should know you are the ones inside. This is where you have methods or fields that have an excess modifier, an inappropriate excess modifier, something like public on everything or nothing specified. Why might this be problematic? Well, for one, it violates encapsulation. So encapsulation in object-oriented programming is saying to hide your data and only expose the behavior of a class. And also, this allows your test to directly access and manipulate the DOM by getting those by objects. If they get those objects, then they're putting in that stuff that we just cleaned out, the responsibilities that we just have taken out of the class. So we want to make sure to still keep those separate. And to do that, we can narrow the scope. So we do that by just making sure everything is private that needs to be and only the things that are public. So this WebDriver can be private. These fields should be private. These classes, all of these are fine. I basically asked myself, am I happy with my test code calling this? If so, yes, it can be public. If I had something that was maybe an internal method that was returning a web element or a list of web elements, I would make those private. For search tests, the tests have to be public. The before and after have to, but we can make these fields private. If we would have kept that little test search method, that little helper one for these, I would have probably made that one private because I don't want other tests utilizing that. All right, next smell is inefficient waits. The speed of machine is faster than man, so you slow it down any way you can. And usually this is done with a thread.sleep. No. Why not? Well, it slows down your runtime. You find yourself chasing your tail, right? So you've created a test, and there's a little slight wait, so you put in 1 second that you want to wait for. But when you run this on another machine, then it takes 1.2 seconds. This fails now because you didn't wait long enough. So you change that wait time. You say, okay, well, I'll put in 2 seconds, right? You run it on some other machine, it takes 2.2 seconds. Again, it's failing. You're constantly going back and changing this code. You say, okay, I'll make it wait 5 seconds. That should be enough. If it takes longer than that, then good, it needs to fail. Well, the problem with that is you're waiting 5 seconds when in some cases it only takes 1. So you're waiting 5 times longer than you need to. That might not be so bad in one test, but as you grow this, you have hundreds, maybe thousands of tests, that adds up pretty quickly. So how do we fix this? We wait intelligently. Selenium has this beautiful class called WebDriverWait that will allow you to wait conditionally for things to occur. So we're going to go inside of here, get rid of those thread.sleeps. So this clear, if we look at the application, when we clear this, what are we actually waiting for? Well, we're waiting for all of the books to reappear. Now, I struggled with this at first, like, okay, do I wait for there to be like 8 books? Well, this is test data at this point. I could add more books and then I would have to update my test. Remember, always think ahead. Always try to make your code future-proof. I could simplify this by saying, well, I really want to wait until there are no hidden books. So let's do WebDriverWait. And you just pass WebDriverWait, your driver, and the amount of time, basically a timeout. So not the amount of time you want to wait, but a max amount of time, a timeout. So what this will do is continuously query for some condition, and then if in 5 seconds that condition has not occurred, then it will stop. So if it takes half of a second, then it'll end in half of a second. So we can wait until, and then we give it some expected condition, and we want to say, we want to wait for the number of elements, I'm going to say hidden books, which we haven't defined yet, to be 0. In hidden books, I can use this same locator and take the not out, call this hidden books, and we'll say li dot UI screen. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing here. I need to add the WebDriverWait. So I've already defined this. I'm not going to repeat this again. So I'll put this here. And we can take this out of here and put it in the constructor. All right, so that's already ready for us. And we can say, now, wait until, and what are we waiting until for this one? Well, maybe we want to wait until the presence of a hidden book. So we can do something like that. Now be careful with things like this. I'm, again, starting to think ahead to the future. Right now, all of my tests are waiting for this book to be there. I could do a search that matched everything and nothing would be hidden. So I have to think about that as well. I would probably overload this method to take in like some Boolean value and say, do you want me to, like, you know, throw the exception or eat the exception when the timeout occurs? So that's something to consider. Okay, so we've done that. Now our last smell, multiple points of failure. The framework's job is to force state, not to determine a test's fate. So I'm one of those people that try not to say always and never, but I feel really strongly about framework not ever verifying a test or failing or passing a test, okay? The issue, again, it violates single responsibility. So we did all of that work to move our framework from our test. And our framework should now be this neutral code that just gives us information about the state of our application. So, yes, I found the book, or no, I didn't find the book, or this is the text that I found, right? when you have your framework verifying things, then it limits the reusability of that code, because now I can't have a test that calls into that method for a negative case where I want to make sure maybe the book is not there. The way that Jake has this set up, that would fail. So what we're going to do is take out the assertions, and we're just going to return true or false. If you find this book, just return true. If you've looped through all of the books and you haven't found it, then return false. And we can get rid of this. Okay? So we have to make sure now nobody's doing the assertion, so our test needs to handle that assertion. So we'll just move this inside of an actual assertion. And same thing in here. All right. And so now our code is nice and clean. We have short methods. We have short classes. This class is 48 lines. This search page is 55 lines. If we get rid of these unused imports, it gets even shorter. This before class and after class. For now, this is okay in here because we only have one test class. But if we were to increase or enhance this framework to then also search for also test the cart or something, and we created a new test class that focused on those types of tests, we would find ourselves copying this code again. We want to avoid duplication, so we could then put that into a base test that your test classes would inherit from. That's a bit overkill for this now. Don't over-architect your stuff. For now, you don't have to do that because there's only one test. Okay? So those are the smells. Should I run this? Are the search gods with me? The demo gods with me today? Yaha, and it worked. So we cleaned it up. It's still working. It's beautiful. And that is it. Thank you. Do we have time for questions or no?
Thank you for a great presentation. I
Thank you.
have a question in your code. Would you show me again?
Okay. Test or the page?
Yes. I think there's the code with you modified your element. Maybe the search keyword, search method inside the search method.
Yes.
And there's a driver.find element. But actually this method can throw the exceptions. Do we have to deal with this exception inside this code?
Good question. So the question is, do we have to deal with exceptions inside of here? So remember I said I tried to be, in my framework, I try to be as neutral as possible and not deal with all that kind of stuff. So if an exception is going to be thrown from like find element because that element is not there, we're on the wrong page because of some bug, I allow that exception to be thrown, and that will fail the test, right? So trying to add in the implementation to catch that exception and then fail the test or something like that should not be done, right, in the framework, from my opinion. I don't think that is that framework's responsibility to handle that. The test will still fail because of the exception. Any other questions? One in the back.
I believe you missed one spot. Could you scroll down a little bit?
Yes?
I believe that kind of if in that case, basically if-else statements are not readable.
Which line?
45.
This if?
Yeah, I prefer to just return that value in the condition. So if just return title that equals ignore case, the logic inside will be pretty much the same, and you don't have to deal with bracelet.
Except that you're inside of a loop. So if you returned right here and the first book that came back wasn't that title, then it would fail for no good reason. Like you're trying to see if the visible books, there could be more than one book that has Lisa. Lisa's written more than one book, for example. Or so if we look for a title where there may be duplicates, I'm trying to see like if my book is present in all of the visible books that are there. So because it's a loop, I don't want to fail on the very first book that it checks. But if it was just one book that came back, like you're suggesting, then I agree. That would be a much more efficient method because I then wouldn't loop through. I wouldn't have a list in that case. Any other questions? Okay. One more.
You have the hidden books and the visible books, where one is basically the negation of the other.
Yes.
Is there a specific reason that you're specifying them both rather than negating one of them?
One is for the readability of them, right? So I could probably work with these visible books in the clear in some kind of way, but it makes my brain hurt. And if it makes my brain hurt, then whoever has to come behind me, like they have to do these mental gymnastics as well. So having these both as like just visible and hidden, this is so readable to say, wait for the hidden books to be 0. Yes. Okay. All right, so I'll be around if you think of any other questions. If you didn't think my code was clean, but you were too polite to say it in front of everybody, you can come and tell me privately. Thank you so much.